On the, it's right here.
Pen.
Yeah.
Very good. So annoying. So they've gone from pushing 4 buttons to pushing 2. You don't have a degree, you can't read that yet. All right, so where do we finish in here? We gotta get going right away. We gotta get started. Did we get to agrarian problems? Let's do it. This look good?
Yeah.
And reform capitalism or else. Yes, I'll show you the assassination book in later. So agrarian problems. We haven't done this at all. We're rolling. Here we go. Yeah. Debt is the number one problem. We talked about this back to Shays Rebellion. You know, farmers are always in debt. Remember, they only have one time a year they can do a crop. And so everything kind of focuses back to debt. And debt just hangs over them. Because can't pay back the debt, that's when you lose your farm. That's when you become sharecroppers. You're tied to the land. I mean, they all see this. Next, overproduction. What does overproduction do to prices? The prices that farmers are getting for their goods drops them. And the thing was, more land was put under the plow after the Civil War. In fact, the land under the plow almost doubled from 1860 to 1865 to 1900. So more land under the plow. All that land in the West, significant land in California, and land that was taken from the various tribes. Remember the Indian Removal Act? This land that was taken away at bayonet point. A lot of it was not plowed yet, was not cultivated until after the Civil War. And the thing is, too, if there's already producing more, and farmers are sitting there thinking, oh no, I'm not being able to pay back my debts. I need money. A lot of them are going to take loans to buy additional land. To produce more, which leads to more debt, right? And remember the boom bust cycle. The first thing that happens is overproduction. And what do they always do? Produce more. Farmers are even more susceptible than any other occupation because of that one time a year. The closest example I could give are some of those stores, like small, like one time a year, you know, they cater to Christmas. And if they don't sell a lot that Christmas, they're devastated. Same kind of thing. And then mechanization, all these new products of the Industrial Revolution. And so by the end of the century, there are steam powered tractors and windmill powered pumps, steel tip plows and better plows. All those might increase production, but it's a debt. But the big one is the mechanical reaper, that form of mechanization. At first, the first mechanical reaper could do the work of 10 laborers, soon 20. Now that might seem like a boom for farmers. One guy can produce more, but that means more production and more debt because they have to buy it. Also, it's no coincidence. There's going to be all this migration from the farms to the cities as kind of farm families always had a lot of children. Now all of a sudden they don't need the kids. The majority of the kids don't have to work. They don't need the workers, so they're sent to the cities. Next, so that increases debt. Next, railroads. And railroads, railroads might seem like a boon. You get goods to market. We talk about the transportation revolution, all the changes, but dropping shipping costs. But they did something called price discrimination. And railroads took advantage of their power because once the railroads came, everybody who needed to ship goods was dependent completely on the railroads. And not just to ship their goods, but also to get goods from, get food, to get manufactured goods from the East Coast, whatever it might be. So let me give you 2 examples of price discrimination. Do railroads charge more per ton? Now this is per ton for big loads or small loads? Significantly more for small loads, like 4 or 5 times more. Now the railroads won't even take small loads. They won't even take it, won't even look at it. The railroads, they all just want to load once, unload once. So for example, on the High Line, you're going to ship wheat, you have to fill 110 cars. That's about 3 sections of wheat. Sections of 1 by 1 mile square. So imagine a farm that big. Meaning small and sure. So they charge more. Next, do railroads charge more per mile for long haul, let's say Seattle to, or Chicago to Seattle, or short haul, let's say Missoula? more per mile. Significantly more for short haul. Ideally, what a railroad would want, and now this is all that railroads are. They've completely iced out the small markets. And it's actually a real problem because the shipping costs are higher because trucks are more expensive. They like to load once and unload once. And that's all they do. In as late as the 1980s, railroads still like shipped a lot of food and they would stop at every town and deliver. Trains never stop here. At least to unload and unload. Never. Ever, ever, ever. And so, in fact, the only time they ever stop here is when they're bringing stuff just to when they occasionally will repair the rail and it's carrying stuff like that. That's it. So, price discrimination, but even more, the biggest price discrimination are monopolies. When it's the only railroad, they're going to jack the prices. They know that people are going to pay more because there's no other way to get the wheat out of here. I keep saying this because this is some of the best wheat producing region in the world to this day up here. And so they charge 10 times more to ship wheat out of here than wheat out of, let's say, Kansas at this time, because at this time, there are about 15 railroads. In fact, what a railroad would do, like the Great Northern that went here, they'll jack up the prices when they have a monopoly, and then that allows them to cut the prices in places where there's competition. Now that makes sense. And if you're running a railroad, that makes sense. I'll take advantage of that to undercut, so I can drop it below profitable prices in Chicago and then make up the difference in half. But if farmers' entire livelihoods relied upon that, that means their life is in the hand of somebody trying to make a lot of money, and they can be destroyed because of that. But it is a balancing act, and it shows the power of these railroads. We see it today. If you've ever had to look at, like, let's say, airline firms, it costs as much to go from Helena to Salt Lake City. And I know this for a fact, because my sister-in-law had to do it, to fly from Berlin to New York City. Competition. They make up the difference in the small ones. That Helena for airlines, that's the think about small and monopoly. With railroads all. And so here is a farmer warning people about the threat of the railroad coming. That's actually a pretty good cartoon, isn't it? And it's also one more thing. It's the farmer warning them. And there's a real belief that farmers had that all these urban people thought they were a bunch of yokels and yahoos. Yokels was the term used a lot in the 1880s. That farmers were very smart, didn't know anything. And a lot of times you tell somebody they're not smart, they tend to believe it. Of course, rural people thought people in the city were decrepit and criminal and full of vice and all this kind of stuff. It's nothing like that to them. That's what that's what's called lying. It's amazing how those same attitudes just kind of go on. I know we live in a big urban area like Helena, but if you don't believe me, travel someplace in a big town and say to a big city, like Billings, no, like I can still vividly remember the first time I went to Chicago, and people were asking me, "So you guys still ride horses to school? Do you have schools?" You know, things like that. Because I said I was from Montana, and I of course said, "Me not heard of schools." Yes. Yes. Yeah. If you've been there, you know. You ride a horse? Yeah. Yeah. Are you a, and then people say, you know, like quasi-racist tropes, like if you get attacked by Indians, they say, no, a lot of my friends are. Yeah.
Did you actually respond with Nino Grace?
I did not respond that way. But I did say yes. Yes, we ride horses. Oh yeah. Yeah. They let us ride through the hallways. In the buildings we have hallways. Yes.
Did you mention how to take care of our horses?
That's actually the law. Yeah.
Yeah.
The law in the state of Montana. If you ride your horse to school, the principal has to be careful. I almost want to see. I'm not saying you should do that, but everybody tomorrow bring a horse. And if they, why you're all doing that together, say, well, Mr. Mahelish told us to. Okay, moving on.
I know that.
But railroads also had like the storage facilities, and they charge big fees for that kind of. And so railroads had a big monopoly. Yeah, farmers have no brains, is what a lot of people thought. Have no brain. don't know why it does that. Okay. Other policies. So farmers felt that we have these massive programs, and this adds, if they have to pay more, it adds to their costs, and therefore price, the actual profit they get, the marginal profit goes down. Debt. All these things add to debt. Next, the government is purposely trying to create deflation. The government is doing everything it can to have virtually no inflation or deflation, actual deflation, which probably was going on in the 1880s. And we have this today. You have incredibly low inflation numbers. And that's why the Federal Reserve is going to raise interest rates again today. But anyways, remember the coinage act that went on the gold standard? Farmers called it the crime of 73. And the gold standard by definition creates deflation. Also makes it very hard for governments to control their money supply. This will hammer countries, like, for example, if governments have to spend a lot of money. Let me throw an example. War or depression. One of those are coming. Moving on. Another example are incredibly regressive taxes, which also increase deflation. Regressive taxes, that's a term for, and tariffs are the best example of this at this time. Greater percentage of their income if the taxes are regressive. Those working people at the bottom of the income, do they pay higher percentage of their income, or the wealthy? The very wealthy, the top 5 or 6%.
You even need this now.
No, I'm asking in regressive taxes. What does that mean? The bottom pays more or the top pays a greater percentage? Regressive means the bottom pays more. Working people and farmers pay significantly more. And this is a tax code obviously created for those on top. But this fits in with laissez-faire economics. The idea is that you should have a tax system where working people pay more because they don't know what to do with the money anyways. But those on top shouldn't pay any taxes because they'll use that money to create prosperity. And that fits in very much with social Darwinism. And that is the essence of conservative economics to this day. And these farmers were complaining about it. There was no income tax at this time. And what tax today is very much like a tariff. With the bottom actually about 90%, pay really high percentage, most of the time.
All of them.
Say it again. Federal is just like national government tax, a specific type of tax. Very much like a tariff. Yes. Sales tax. States that have really high sales tax, that's specifically designed to get rich, wealthy people a tax break. Like Florida. Florida is specifically designed so working people pay a greater percentage. Rich people pay much lower percentages. Montana, by its constitution, cannot have one unless the people vote for it.
How is that working? The sales tax is the same.
Good question. And it was one of the things that it seemed like, everyone's paying a 5% tax. But for most people, they have to spend every penny they have to survive. So that's like 5% of virtually 100% of their income. But the extremely wealthy, they're going to have surplus income. In fact, that's the goal. They'll use that to invest in business, or they could also build toilets. But since they're not spending that money to have extra income, that money. That kind of makes sense. Yeah. So that's the big thing. If you have extra money, it's not taxed by sales. Income tax will tax it. That's why income tax is generally a little bit more. Everyone gets the word that's opposite for regressive. Yeah, progressive. So states like Washington, really high sales. Montana has voted 4 times in my life for sales tax. And each time was lost. Big time. Democrats are almost universally opposed. Republicans generally want it, but they know they'll. The Republicans there have talked about it. They're bemoaning the fact that we don't have the sales tax. Right. And the problem was if it actually went to a vote, it would fail. That's they also want to change the Constitution, so we'll see. Next. So what they want is inflation. They want to get off this gold standard, get different kind of taxation. They want to print paper currency. Remember the Civil War, I told you how they used green dye because it was cheap. Greenbacks, so more paper currency, or at least coin silver money. silver coins. At least coin it. Back, I didn't tell you about silver coins. So silver coins, anybody have silver dollars from this era? Few people? That was always a gift from my uncle when I was a kid growing up, with silver dollars. Pretty good gift. But the federal government did not really coin those. Let's say it was mine. So a silver city, Butte. Have to actually pay the mint in Denver. That's why there's a mint in Denver. Because of gold. They have to pay for it to get it minted into silver dollars. So they pay a little fee, it get minted, but then they get $1. Yeah. Actually make the coin. So there's still a mint in Denver. There's a mint in San Francisco, and the main one they do most of it. And you can, if you ever look at a coin, it has a little S, a D, that means San Francisco, Denver, no mark is Philadelphia. One of those strange little things I just know. It's amazing what little facts you picked up. We've talked about that before. Next. So they want more money in circulation. That doesn't mean there'll be inflation, but that's what they're hoping. If you print a bunch of money, but everyone just buries it in their backyard, there's no inflation. People have got to spend it to get inflation. There's a great economic term for that. It's called velocity. Yeah, see? Yeah. But all of these lead to more debt. Here's the problem they have. They are debt. They want policies to get them out of debt, but the policies are actually happening and promoted for the most part by both political parties leads to more debt. Well, here's the tariff. They have it here. It's called taxes right here, protectionist tariff, and who gets rich? This is supposed to be a wealthy business. And so farmers feel like the entire political system is rigged against them. And so there's going to be a couple of different farmer groups. Farmers Alliance, B1, but one we need to know is called the Grange. And they began to become political after the Civil War and the Panic of '73. They're nonpartisan. So they're not Republicans or Democrats. They'll support whatever party will support their goals. And the biggest thing they want are a series of laws called the Granger laws that would regulate railroad rates. There's a lot of R's in the state. The Granger laws. So get rid of some of the price discrimination. So I should add, for example, Indiana at this time, that is a Republican state. And therefore the Grange supported the Republicans. Iowa was more of a Democratic state, so the Grange supported the Democrats. Whoever supported their policy. And this is a very pragmatic idea. The idea is they wouldn't offend either Republicans or Democrats. The problem is it makes them weak. They're just weak. They have no real place to stand. But they got a series of these laws passed, and the railroads went nuts. Nuts, not strong enough a word. They were furious. They even went to the Supreme Court and tried to throw these state laws on. This one laws out. This one's in Illinois. But Munn versus Illinois said it was constitutional for states to regulate railroad rates within their state. But remember the slave trade compromise of the Constitution way back when? That said that only the federal government regulates interstate commerce. And when the railroads saw this, a couple railroads, the Illinois Central, there's another railroad called the Gulf Mobile in Ohio, one called the Wabash Railroad. And it just basically operated kind of a triangle here. And let's say they're taking goods from St. Louis up to Chicago. They started going St. Louis via Indianapolis up to Chicago. They crossed the state lines and then said, we don't have to follow these Granger laws because it's interstate commerce. Yeah. And that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Wabash Railroad case threw out any Granger laws because of interstate commerce. The states can't regulate if it's interstate commerce. And once that happened, the Granger laws fell apart. The Granger laws died. Because then railroads could say basically everything we do is interstate commerce. Everything we do. Now you might say, wait a second, how could you say everything we do is interstate commerce? If you're shipping goods from St. Louis to Chicago and you're staying in Illinois. Where were the trains from? So they, interesting concepts. So once that happened, they just threw out. And the Grange declined as a political organization. They never recovered. There's still gonna be Granger societies. There was a Granger Montana. I remember being a kid going to these Granger halls in rural Montana because they had like big stuff. But it was more of a social organization. Yeah.
So, since you have these two bonds.
But this one only says for the states.
Okay. Gilded.
No, only the federal government can regulate it. And that's a good question. That means you're coming up the right to the next one. So that means it has to be federal. And that's why the Grange went away as this state group. It has to be federal. And that means it's got to be in the political process. The Republicans or the Democrats. But farmers looked at both parties, small farmers, and they saw themselves as completely ignored. They felt left out. Nobody's paying attention to this. Now, workers felt the same way, but it was much more complex, especially in cities. Farmers totally left out. And so they looked at this political process going on and they see it as all they care about are cities or national regions. And that's why we got to get to a little bit of what's going on. The party that seemed like it was most likely to help small farmers was totally captured by two basic groups. The Democratic Party was basically the party now of Jim Crow and of the wealthy plantation owners. They didn't care about small farmers. And in the North, the very large Democratic Party was in cities. And they were being controlled by political machines. Political machines grew in the fact that these cities, urban areas grew so fast because of massive overcrowding, high prices for rent where people couldn't find a place to live. Gee, like today, even though rents are going down some places. But we live in health, so that's not happening here. And there's all these people coming. Migration from people in the United States from the farms, immigration, we talked about before, this new immigration. And don't forget, the bomb throwing anarchists and the immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe. And so a lot of farmers, they look at this as, my kids won't have the same dream, they have to leave, go to these dangerous cities where all these strange people are going. But back to the urban area. There were no services in these towns. Remember, the first police force, which is to control population and to a lesser degree stop crime, wasn't created to the 1820s. Yeah, police, very weird. They have no responsibility to protect you. That was actually ruled by the Supreme Court in 2007. So it's a very confusing thing. But there's no services. There were no sewers. The fire departments were all private. In fact, these private fire companies would actually burn down buildings just to take advantage of the fees from burning them down. Or just big looting operations, start a fire, loot. The schools were not really established. No parks, no garbage collection. They're talking about by the 1870s in New York City, you would have to step over a mound of garbage that might be 5 feet high. There were like paths cut into the garbage because people just dump them out in the street. And you think garbage? We can imagine how filthy garbage is. But think about the other kind of garbage, filth on the streets. What are you going to do when the fact that a city like New York City has 5 million horses and mules? Can you imagine that? No one's cleaning the streets. I'm trying to figure out what would be worse, rain or really dry. Because really dry, all that manure would flake and would kind of cover everything with this fine layer of horse manure. That's why they thought cars would be such a great thing to cut down on pollution. Moving on. Yes, I know, sometimes things don't work out the way you might think. But there weren't any of these services. The political parties filled that vacuum. They provided public services. They either set up the city government to start providing these, or the machines did it themselves. There was absolutely no aid for unemployed or poor. Think about when these economic crashes that people are laid off. There's nothing to help people in those situations or find a place to live. But the party would. The party would remember, in New York City, it was a Democratic Party. They would go to the poor and say, here's a bag of food or a bag of coal to get you through these hard times. Remember who got you this. Remember who got you this. There'd be members of the Democratic Party would meet people coming off the trains from the farms, or when they get out of Ellis Island, they'd meet them there. Like somebody speaking Italian, and they knew the boat was coming from Italy. And they would say, let us help you. We'll find you a place to live. People like you so you can assimilate easier. We will help you. All we ask is remember who did it. Remember who did this. And so the Democratic Party did this there. The Republican Party did it in Ohio. All they ask in return is vote. Vote for us. And by the way, this is retail politics. There's problems, you elect people to solve the problems. Now, we could disagree on the solution, but this is basic politics. And this is not necessarily bad, but there might be something else. Also, turn your back on graft. Graft is a term for literally stealing from the government. And these political machines would take over the city governments of places like New York City and then pad the bills. So increase the cost of the bills and then pocket the money. Or give contracts to friendly businessmen and they get kickbacks, money under the table, bribes. All these kind of things to get rich. That's graft. Literally stealing from the government. Graft. So turn your back on this. And so the machines did some good things, but also without a doubt were as corrupt could be. The biggest machine at this time, the famous one, was Tammany Hall, which was the Democratic machine. There was a hall there. There was a mistranslation of a tribe that used to live there, so it was called Tammany. They had a meeting hall, kind of closet turning where the Democratic Party met, and they ran New York City. And the legacy vote is still with it today. New York politics is still just weirdly corrupt. Not all bad, and you see corruption everywhere, but New York is just weird. And the head of this machine would be called a boss. And so boss William Tweed would be the most famous boss. Thomas Nast, the same guy who did Santa Claus and the Elephant for the Republican Party, do so many cartoons against Tweed's corruption. Of course, he was a Republican too. That cartoon would become famous. When Tweed would finally literally get caught collecting a bribe and fled to Spain, he was caught in Spain based upon those cartoons. That gives you an idea how influential they were. And he was replaced by William J. Plunkett, Boss Plunkett. And this is actually this picture of Plunkett. I think that's pretty clever, just a money bag. But Plunkett talked about the complexity of these machines, and he called it honest graft. Oh, sure, we overcharged for building the city hall in New York City by 1,000%. But we built City Hall. Sure, we overcharged for parks, but we built a park. We built schools. We built streets. Sure, it's graft, but it's honest graft. That's like the tall, short guy. So the machines are going to be complex. And so you have farmers who are sitting there saying, we have a problem with deflation. And the Northern Democratic Party especially is controlled by this. And the Republican Party, Indiana, but especially Ohio. Marcus Hanna ran the politics of the state of Ohio by the 1890s. A millionaire businessman, Boss Hanna. He ran Ohio. And Ohio is going to have this reputation to this day of the state of presidents, partially because Hanna could almost pick the president. The most famously, two famous ones would be James Garfield, but the most famous, James Garfield, Benjamin Harrison, but the most famous is going to be William McKinley, literally the puppet of Marcus Hanna. So these are the machines. Farmers are looking outside in. So what else about national politics? If their problems can only be solved by the federal government, what's going on there? So let's get to 1880. We've done elections. Remember, Grant was elected twice. Then Rutherford B. Hayes at the Compromise of 1876. And now 1880. So this is the time now the Democrats really think they have a chance. They nominated Winfield Scott Hancock. And there he is on the left with the elephant. This is an anti-Democratic Party campaign slogan because Hancock was a war hero, the hero of Gettysburg. He was the one who held the Union center and Pickett's charge. And so the Democrats are tainted by the Confederacy. And so he could say, how can you say we're pro-Confederacy when we elect a Union war hero or nominate a Union war hero? But this shows the Democratic Party and secessionist symbols on their show. That's a pretty good cartoon. The Republicans bitterly divided, but not over monopolies, not over railroad policy, not over inflation or deflation, about government jobs called patronage. Virtually every government job the president could hire or fire. Remember the spoil system back for Andrew Jackson? Well, this is a plum thing. You could make a lot of money under the table as head of the post office or a tax collector called working head of the customs house. And so a lot of these people would give money to political campaigns with the expectation of a plum government job, or to go be an ambassador and be, treated like royalty in England, things like that. So government jobs would be a way, almost a way that people would give money to candidates and then turn around and get a government job. There were two groups within the Republican Party. The stalwarts, like the system of patronage. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. The half-breeds wanted some kind of reform, saying this is leading to corruption. Do you remember the Credit Mobilier scandal? That company created by the Union Pacific? That was on everybody's mind. And the Republicans were hurt. The Democrats bitterly attacked them for the party of corruption. And so a lot of Republicans are saying, we have to do something. That's the term half-breed. I should add, for economic policy, they liked the regressive taxes. They really didn't have a problem with monopolies. They were more and more called conservative. Both of them. That's laissez-faire, believing in social governance. I should add, a lot of Democrats did too. Well, they finally, after over 100 votes at the Republican convention, chose, do you remember that term for a candidate that nobody knows? Another dark horse, but a prominent officer in the Civil War, representative from Ohio, James Garfield. He was seen as not necessarily a half-breed, but incorruptible. He was seen as an honest man. He actually was seen as somebody who was still going to fight to do something about Reconstruction ending and the anti-grandfather's clause laws that were just started. And here's Garfield riding in. It's on the horseback, looking brave and strong. He was unknown, though, by most people to the kind of events of it. But to appease the stalwarts, they chose, he's right here in the back, Chester A. Arthur. Arthur wasn't even an elected official. He was the head of the customs house in New York and got rich on patronage. And I'll tell you about things he would buy a little bit later on. So, incorruptible, kind of ally with the half-breeds, full stop. Divide them up. If I mention the vice president, this is what we call an omen. Foreshadowing. Yes. Sure. They all knew what was going to happen. They all knew. And it was by the end of the century that presidents would routinely call their vice president the angel of death. Get away from me. You're just waiting for me to die. Ha ha! Kind of thing. Ha ha! Trust. So, I should add, Ulysses S. Grant tried one more time, but he was so tainted by Credit Mobilier, he couldn't go back. If he would have ran, if he could have got the nomination, he would have most certainly won again. But Grant tried. And so with that, but the most effective campaign ploy was not the Democrats' cry of corruption. It was the Republicans waving the bloody shirt. And here is mocking them. Here is Garfield reluctantly forced to wear or use the bloody shirt. And what it was is accusing the Democrats as traitors. And it literally started back in 1866, where Republicans would barge into Democratic meetings with shirts covered with like pig's blood or cow's blood, and saying this is the blood of a Union soldier killed by Democratic traitors. So it was literally waving the bloody shirt. It didn't start as a metaphor, but they just hit the Democrats over and over again. The party of secession, the party of traitors, the party of the Ku Klux Klan, over and over and over again. So they're calling a war hero of the United States to help win the war for the United States a traitor. Do you believe that? That could never happen before or since. Remember the Republicans under Jefferson called Washington a traitor. And this will happen. Let's just say it's going to happen. It's happened in your lifetime, and it will happen again. So people say politics are overly dirty today. Wow, it was effective enough to win. So we're going to go backwards. Oh, I should add too. Also, there was a pig in here, and so I found this and thought you should look at this. I really want to see that. Who's with me? And here's the other thing. Okay, so it's still 18 beers, right? And I was thinking about this. Where would the pig keep the beer? And then I remember, well, it's consumed. You got to carry the beer away. It's Australia. You got a pouch, right? This is science. Science. That's what we call natural selection. Thank you, Darwin. So the election of 1880. Red, that's Republican, green, Democrat. The solid South. But Garfield won. But the popular vote, even though it doesn't matter, was only 10,000 votes apart. That gives you an idea how complete or equal the country was. Yeah.
What is that little slip?
Oh, one of the electors was supposed to vote for. He was supposed to vote for Hancock, but instead voted for him. And there was not, it was not clear. Now virtually every state has a law, like Montana has a law. If you're pledged to vote for, let's say the last one is for Trump, you have to vote for Trump. But it's still not clear, what do you do if they don't vote that way? Because that's federal, state, it's back to this stuff. Right away, Garfield became president. Garfield never actually moved to Washington, D.C. He stayed in Ohio. And so he would actually take the train every weekend back to Ohio near Columbus. His farm where his family lived, and then go back. So he really only spent 4 days a week in the White House. And every day, every morning, before sunup, the lines would start. People lined up every morning to ask for a job. Every morning, all these people saying, I worked on your campaign, give me a job. I mean, hundreds of people. They would go, and this is back to you, they would literally knock on the door, wait, come into the foyer, while the rest of the line would take one step up until they could knock on the door. It seems so weird about just going up and knocking on the door and saying, hey, President Biden, what's up? Hey, Joe. No. Next time in White House, try it. Climb over the fence and see what happens. Moving on. One of those guys was from Cleveland. He wrote a couple letters to the editor. He was an itinerant worker, meaning he kind of moved from job to job. And assumed because of his 2 letters he wrote to the Cleveland Plains Dealer newspaper, Garfield was elected president and Garfield owes him. His name, Charles Guiteau. And Guiteau actually moved to Washington, D.C. and showed up twice, actually talked to Garfield. And Garfield's like, I have no idea who this guy is. And demanded to be made ambassador to Austria, then ambassador to France. Guiteau quickly ran out of money and soon was living on the streets. And still, hanging around the White House. At first, assuming to get a job, Maddie wasn't getting it. 2, he is being cheated. He's being robbed. There's a plot against him, a conspiracy against him, all led by Garfield. Garfield, every day on Friday, either Thursday night or Friday early afternoon, would walk to the train station. Did he have guards? It might seem weird after we've already had a president assassinated, just less than 15 years before. 60 years before. But everyone thought that was an aberration. So he had no guards. He usually walked with a couple aides. Garfield would walk to the train station, go back to the aisle, just sit normal carriage. Uto was waiting one day and shot it in the back with a black powder revolver. So the bullet entered right here, lodged, nicked the spleen, and lodged behind the lip. Yeah, it was nasty. No, he was still alive, and there's a chance he could live if he doesn't get infected. But they did what they did at the time. They got to find the bullet, and so they use these long brass prods, and they could stick them into the hole, and hope they hear a click. And a few times they heard a click, but it turned out to be the bone, and so they would dig and gouge and couldn't find it. And Garfield was really worried about losing his senses. So he didn't want to be knocked out with either, which is obviously really dangerous, but at least he'd be asleep. Or he didn't want to take morphine because in the army, he had seen so many people become morphine addicts at the end of the Civil War. Yes, still an issue today, isn't it? Opioids. But he's an agony. And they kept doing. Even Alexander Graham Bell, what did he best known for inventing? What did he invent? He had a primitive metal detector where he could shoot electrodes through Garfield who was laying on a lead sheet. Thought was would bounce off the bullet. Didn't work. They gouged and gouged him. Over 6 weeks, he's alive. And they finally cut him up so much, bled him, did all these things. It took about 3 pints of blood. Garfield found something. He probably would have lived, but they tortured him to death. It's just like one of these, you've got to be kidding me. So, I love that they're doing this and he's using the phone to try to hear a little shot or a little, all of what's a little bit of static. And so now we have President Chester Arthur. Republican stalwart, he's president. And almost immediately, even though he was a stalwart, they passed civil service reform, the Pendleton Act. And the Pendleton Act said there'll be professional civil service, but everybody must do a civil service exam. And so they'll be professional. So if you get a government job, you have to do some kind of exam, some kind of check to show that you're qualified. And they haven't, then virtually every state would follow this in some way. Also, most government jobs aren't fired when there's a new administration. They're permanent jobs. Now, this could be good because it shows that people don't have to worry about trying to appease whatever the new president or governor is. But at the same time, you have people who work there a long time, and it's very hard to shift. But, you know, a town like Helena, if we have patronage for dramatically changing, Helena is a government town. It would not function without the government. State government and federal government makes up most of the workers. You combine local government, and it's about 80% of the workers are directly or indirectly employed by the government. I should add, though, that it totally changed campaign finance to big money said, oh, I'm not going to get a job. I want antitrust. Isn't it ironic, though, that the stalwart would sign this? But he, you know, the Republicans didn't want him. He was still tainted by this, so he would not win his nomination. But Arthur did make a lot of money from graft when he was head of the customs house. And he would use that money to where he would actually buy over 10,000 pairs of pants. He was obsessed by pants. He would change his pants 4 or 5 times an hour, sometimes more. Constantly changing pants and showing off his pants and buying collector's pants. His prized possession, he had John Adams pants. And since he was bigger than John Adams, he had it altered so he could wear, I'm wearing John Adams pants, and then switch to new pants. I don't find this odd at all. Yes. No. He was obsessed by pants. And so with that, 1884. I'm disturbed by the term lying. Now, sometimes I might joke, but I'm not purposely trying to mislead you so you believe something that changed your life. That I won't tell you. 1884, the Democrats nominated Grover Cleveland. And Grover Cleveland really was, to say he's a dark horse is understating dark horse. In less than 2 years, he went from private citizen to mayor of Buffalo, New York, to governor of New York, to president, in less than 2 years. Not elected at all to that. And he was a northerner. He did hire a substitute to get out of the Civil War. And the whole idea is we're leaving the war behind us. And he promised some reforms. He promised some reforms. They were called, the reformers were goo-goos. Goo. What does goo-goo mean? Good government. Get it? Good government. That's Grover right there. Yes, he was a bachelor, and so he was another one that like everyone was like swooning over him or jealous of him. I think it's pretty good. See a resemblance? I'm related to Grover Cleveland. I know. But I know what you're all saying. Well, you're going to pick the coolest president to be related to. No, actually, it's true. Grover Cleveland. All right, so he promised to do something about railroad rates. He promised to cut tariffs. He was a free trader. That's supposed to be ER, to stop lying down. He promised. So he appears like he's going to do a few things the farmers want. And this gives the Republican a little bit of problem because the Republicans are tainted by stalwarts and patronage and everything else. And so they nominate James G. Blaine of Maine. But Maine, he was tied indirectly to Credit Mobilier. And so that was hanging over his head. He had been trying to get the nomination for president since 1876. He finally got it. And this is tied to it. And so here is an anti-railroad one, the railroad monopoly, and the people. I should add, it was the style of the time that toddlers would, regardless of their, what sex, it doesn't matter. They're all going to be dressed the same, with the idea being that it's kind of neutral. This neutral clothing would allow them to grow naturally. And so it was a style at this time, all the way up to the 1920s, that babies and toddlers would wear something that looked like dresses. So it'd be for male or female, whatever, they all wore dresses. So you see pictures of like, I found this picture of Franklin Roosevelt as a little kid, he's in a dress. Because that was just, they were trying to say that could be male or female, it's the easiest to put on. In the 1920s, the fear was that we weren't being manly enough and men were being too feminine. And that's when they started really radically changing that. And you know that pink and blue thing that came about 1920s. Men are going to be blue, manly colors, while women the cult of domesticity. Last thing for today, then, the mugwumps. A lot of Republicans were angry about the corruption, so these were people who rode the fence, and they were called mugwumps. And a lot of them voted for Cleveland. Can you guess what a mugwump is? They were conservative economically. They were mad about the corruption and voted for Cleveland. A mugwump? Anyone know?
Someone who's like,
And it's like this. What's your mug? What's your mug? The base is your mug. Anybody know what your wump is? And that means you're straddling a fence. Your mug's on one side, your wump's on another. Like it? Mugwump. Actually, they're kind of rotten people, the actual mugwumps in real life. But I like the term mugwump. On that happy note, goodbye, everybody. Tomorrow will be, we got to play a march. We'll see you. Goodbye. Oh, we have a quiz tomorrow, too. How many questions do you have? 2? You know.
Next, if you get one wrong, then you get after that.
And then imagine, I'm going to make the questions harder.
I'm gonna go on tomorrow.
Stocks.
Yeah.
You haven't seen them all.
Oh,
No, I don't see them tomorrow. You're in stocks.
okay.
Where are you going?
Going to, what's the?
Boy. The travel is that for
Soccer, yeah.
Don't make up the quiz when you get back. I'm gonna sign lots of chapter 19, and I'm still trying to decide. I want to get one more thing out of the repeat book. Check teams are making up. But finish up. So I'm gonna finish chapter 20. I'm gonna sign down the book. So just stick with it. But it probably won't be good till Tuesday. This is another one too. No. Oh, really? Then I know it's in. All right, Maddie, what do you want? Quiz day or tomorrow? You decide. Yeah, but don't you want to prove right now what you know? So they keep updating teams, and every time they update it, they make it more difficult. You've noticed that every update they do, it's like,